Last fall, I bought a big DeWalt radial arm saw at a live online auction. And I bought it sight unseen, so I hadn't been able to inspect it or look at it. I just had this one photo from the online catalog. 2 days later, I got up early and drove up to Shelton, Washington, which is west of Tacoma. There was a large mill that was closing. The saw was part of that sale. Now, usually at these auctions, I go to the actual auction and I'm able to inspect and look at things before I bid on them. But this one I bought without being able to do that, which made it easier transportation-wise because I could just go and get it instead of going to the auction and then maybe not buying anything, and it was a big waste to go to the auction, or go and get something that I need a trailer for or a bigger truck for. And whereas doing it this way, I can just go get it, and it's a 1 day or even a half a day project. Now, when I got to the site, I was early and on the first day that they were loading things for people, so no one really knew what was going on, and it's a big sprawling mill. So even just finding out where I needed to go and who I needed to talk to took a little while. But I did manage to find the saw and find the forklift and find someone to drive the forklift for me and load the saw in the truck. But I got it all tied down and ready to go. Now, I had noticed when I first saw the saw that the link between the motor and the arm seemed a little loose. And after taking it apart, I found that the carriage, the part that allows the saw to slide back and forth in the arm, was cracked in half. And this was going to be a big issue because that's a very critical part. So I cleaned it up and I got as much weight off of the saw as I could and got it out of the truck. And I can lift it up and then drive the truck out from under the saw. Now, it sat under our back porch for a month or two while I worked on the motor and figuring out what to do with the broken part. And first thinking about it, I thought I could weld it back together again. And I did some research about welding cast iron. It seems like it's doable, but it's probably beyond my skill level. So I found a couple places in town that could probably do it. But what I figured I'd do is to try and actually find an intact piece before I started trying to fix the piece that I had. So I put a post out on the old woodworking machinery site to see if anyone had what I needed. And I actually got several replies. So I picked what looked like was the most similar to what I had. And it's amazing that one can find an old part like this on the internet. But it seemed to be pretty close. So I moved the rollers from my old part onto the new carriage. And this was fairly straightforward. These end blocks on the carriage with a set of the rollers allows the carriage to be tightened and loosened within the arm. And we'll see that in a minute. So once I had the new part in hand, I brought the saw into the shop and I can roll it in under the gantry crane. One issue I had with this is because it's so big, I had to actually build a little platform on top of my stair to have it roll in on. And then even with that, I had to bring my cart over and lift the saw onto the cart a little bit so that the saw would be directly under the gantry crane. My fear was it would swing when I lifted it if it wasn't right below the lift. And once it's inside, I can move it around with my adjustable cart, which works perfect for this. Now I've got the old big radial arm saw, which is now the small radial arm saw, which I kind of just have pushed over to the side. At some point I need to decide whether I really have a use for that or whether I need to get rid of it. And I can clean out the motor, and it had a little bit of sawdust in it. I've seen a lot worse. and I can slide the carriage in, and it actually seems to work. I was pretty amazed. So it sits on top of the motor assembly, or the yoke, I guess. And there's a big bolt that holds it in place. It lets the motor assembly also rotate and slide back and forth on the arm. And it's really heavy. I found also I could use my adjustable cart to lift the motor and the carriage to the right height, and then I could just slide it right onto the arm of the saw. Now the other big issue, besides the broken carriage, was that the motor was wired up for 440 volts, which is the high voltage, and I have the low voltage, the 230 volts in the shop for 3-phase. Rewiring the motor is easy enough. You just switch some wires around and it switches from the high voltage to the low voltage. But the issue was the magnetic starter for the motor. And I wanted to keep the old starter, so I dug around and I looked at it and I did some research and I managed to find a new coil for it. The coil on the starter is determined by the voltage, so you need the right coil within the starter. So I thought I could just get a different one for my lower voltage and put that in and use it. But it turned out what I ordered didn't fit. And at that point I had been working on it and waiting for it for too long, and I gave up on the old switch. And I know how it works in theory, but actually getting it to physically work is another issue. So I ended up buying a brand new starter, which is basically exactly the same thing, just a new version of it. And there really isn't much online on how to wire one of these up. So I looked at one of my other switches that works and wired up this switch based on that. My big worry was getting the remote switch on the front of the arm of the saw to actually control the starter. But it ended up actually working, amazingly. And the motor runs nice and strong, but it sounds a little rough. So I squirted some grease in the end, and it sounds a lot better now. I think it was just a little dry around the outside. Now the carriage needed to be adjusted just a little bit. I was getting a little bit of movement in the motor from side to side. So you can adjust the little end caps up and down, and those adjust the little rollers up and down, which help to tighten the rollers against the arm. I fit the new switch into the old box, so it looks like I'm still using the old starter. And I can put the blade back on, and I can put the blade guard back on, and it works. Now for the table, I wondered about using the old adjustment bars and using a new piece of MDF, but what I ended up thinking I'm going to do is use an old solid core door that I have. So I cut off the old bars off the table, and actually in doing that I found one of them was bent quite a bit. And then even another step from that, I decided what I would do for now is to put the table from the other radial arm saw on just as a temporary table to see that the saw works and cuts, and to kind of finish up this video. So I think in a future video I'd like to do the dust collection for this, and I've got some ideas for that. And also maybe getting the starter box finished up and doing a little work on the blade cover. But for now, it's up and running, and it's been a long project, but it seems to work. The blade needs a little sharpening. I bought the saw originally at the auction for $300, and then I've put in another $200 or so with the new part and the switch. And I'm at about $500 on the saw. That's one thing I find with the old machinery. You can find a good deal, but then it often costs you that much again, or even more, to get it running and working well. But it's a fun process. Thanks for watching.